Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 11 of the Aroundtable.ca Podcast. I'm your host, Philly T, with my co hosts. Apparently, somebody's farting in the microphone. With
No, it's
We're
cheering.
oh,
cheering
cheering.
you. We're cheering
Everyone's
you.
cheering. Cheering. Farting. How was
It's
fart?
You
it's
got a sexy voice, man.
Fart is, that's fart. That's cheering.
so as you can hear, you have Twiddly Doo and Twiddly Dum here, Stephen and Grandmaster Mesh, and on the other side, in the Two Mountains range, you have Mr. Dino as well.
The Beaster. Yeah.
All right, so the topic this week, because I've actually been looking at a lot of, especially with Netflix, there's been a lot of specials in terms of stand-up and so on. So this week's episode is old stand-up versus new stand-up, and I'll probably kick it off this time around. So I actually been reading a few books. I read a George Carlin book about his life and how he went through the different levels of comedy from being a disc jockey on the radio all the way to his popularity until he died. I also read Billy Crystal. He was around the same time as well, the 70s and 80s, and Martin Short, which was in the 70s and 80s as well. And it got me thinking, and I was looking at the different types of styles of stand-up, and I was wondering, I was actually asking which one is better in terms of, and not just the stand-ups themselves, but in terms of the comedy itself, old stand-up versus new stand-up. The old stand-ups, the very old stand-ups that I can think of is Jonathan Winters, which is, if for those of you who don't know who that is, he's essentially the precursor to Robin Williams. He's the type of guy that used to go on a show and just ramble on improv for hours. You had Joan Rivers, Milton Berle, Rodney Dangerfield, the king of the one-liners, George Burns, Bob Hope,
Don Rickles.
Don Rickles. Yeah, I forgot that one. Yeah, Don Rickles, that's a good one.
No.
And then you have the contemporary classic, I guess, or the rebellious type of stand-ups where you had Lenny Bruce, you had Richard Pryor, George Carlin. Billy Crystal was still a cleaner stand-up, but he still is in that group. Robin Williams, George Lopez. And then you have the newer generation of stand-ups where you have the Dave Chappelle's, the Louis C.K., Hassan Minaj from The Daily Show, Fluffy, which is Gabriel Iglesias, and Dane Cook. A lot of people don't like him, but he's still part of that newer generation. And one of the reasons, for me, what seems to be the distinction between the old and the new is the middle one with like Richard Pryor and George Carlin. They were more of the rebellious type of stand-up, trying to push the envelope, trying to push as much as they can. And they got in a lot of trouble for it back in their day. Even the original stand-up, controversial stand-up was Lenny Bruce. He was one of the first ones to actually talk about politics, religion, swearing profusely, and he got arrested a few times on drug charges because he would talk about marijuana and stuff like that in his act. So the old stand-up seems to be the clean type of comedy, and the newer stand-ups now seem to be kind of a mix of a bunch of everyone, and I don't know if there's a particular style. A lot of people that in our age group would say that, the standard for stand-up would be Richard Pryor, George Carlin, maybe Robin Williams, if you put that. In today's day and age, the modern ones, I would maybe Dave Chappelle would probably be the one that would be up there. Louis C.K., which kind of pushes the envelope a little bit. All the other ones seem to be a melting pot of comedians. You can put them in a pot, pick one, and you'll probably get similar material. There's not one that you can say I really have an attachment to. Um, so the big difference is basically clean comedy. If you listen to Rodney Dangerfield, I mean, how can you not laugh at a 5 minute bit with Rodney Dangerfield? Ooh, you got get no respect around here. Um, and you have uh, which that type of comedy has kind of gone in the wayside too. One liner comedy is not really existing much, or at least it's not popular. You have maybe Jimmy Carr or Stuart Francis, I think, and a lot of people now seem to think that the gold standard right now is Dave Chappelle. I mean, you put his name on anything and it gets sold out. Louis C.K. Um, so the main difference, I guess, my point is the old stand up is more cleaner, more family friendly. The new stand up is more controversial, swearing, maybe not as kid friendly. Um, what's better, older than new? You can't really say. I think it's something that you're born with. So either you have it or you don't. I mean, Dave Chappelle is hilarious. Louis C.K. is hilarious. But, I can go back on YouTube and watch Jonathan Winters, watch Milton Berle, watch Rodney Dangerfield, or even, Don Rickles, and I'll still laugh to this day. It's classic. It's never gonna. And the one stand up that I think encompasses the old, the new, and the future is Robin Williams. He was able to take improv, able to take any type of scenario, clean or dirty, and he was able to relate his material to current events. He was able to evolve. Some comedians didn't evolve, right? They stayed in a period of time, and then once time passed them by, you kind of didn't hear them anymore. But Robin Williams was able to encompass all of that, and he was, I mean, you look at his stand-up from, the 70s to all the way to when he passed away, it's hilarious. I mean, even George Carlin to a point, he was able to evolve his comedy to the day to accommodate for today's younger crowd or even his older crowd. Um, I've been rambling on for 7.5 minutes, so I think that's enough.
Thank God.
I think that's enough for me. What do you guys think? Do you guys
Well,
like better the
I
I'll
have
old?
a
wait.
I have a question for you, Philip.
Yeah.
What do you think of Eddie Murphy that he stopped cold
Thank
turkey?
you. Thank you.
Um.
Eddie,
Okay, my take on it, and I know I'm gonna have a lot of haters. Um,
hecklers.
I mean, it was all in all, he was in a period of time where he was very popular in terms of stand up. To me, Delirious is the only one that really stands out. Raw wasn't that great, or it wasn't as great as Delirious. But Delirious was hilarious, which is funny. I just said that. I made a rhyme. um, um, is it for me enough for me to say that it's a class? He's like one of the best stand-ups. For me personally, no, because if I look at the ones that I mentioned, they made a career out of stand-up, and they made yeah, they ventured into movies and stuff like that, but their bread and butter was stand-up. Whereas Eddie kind of did SNL, then he did, in a period, he did make SNL watchable in those horrible years where there was no one on the cast. Um, then he did a few stand-ups, and then he focused mainly on movies. And he doesn't really want to do stand-up anymore. He never closed the door on it, but he's not. He's I don't know. I don't know if it's stage fright or he got burned out or something happened. He doesn't seem to have that itch to be on stage. So for me, he's an actor first, and then he's a stand-up comedian. Whereas the other ones on this list are stand-up comedians first, and then they're whatever medium they decided to do, TV or movies.
Well, not really. Think of this, because Eddie Murphy was high on demand on making movies. So when you're making movies, you're making faster money than you're doing stand-up comedian routine. Because no, think of it. All these comedians became comedians. They stayed comedians because they weren't on demand to make movies, and that's why Eddie Murphy was. Anyways, with the
You know what? Hold on. George Carlin did a lot of acting too.
Yeah, but
But
he was never.
he always continued doing his stand-up routine.
Yeah, but he wasn't getting paid the money that Eddie Murphy was getting paid. Eddie Murphy, when he was doing a movie, like what's it called? Oh my God, what was it?
Beverly Hills
The
Cop?
cop,
Beverly Hills Cop.
Beverly Hills Cop, and all the other one with Switch and all that, whatever it's called. Got the title. They with oh my God, the one he was
That movie, right?
What's it called?
You had 48 Hours, Billy.
48 Hours.
Yeah, 48 hours.
See, look at the movie.
Trading Places.
Yeah, Trading Places. He was always one of the main characters. The other guys weren't. Not even Richard Pryor was ever a main character of a movie.
Sure, he was.
But
which one?
Silver Streak. Him and Gene Wilder.
Nah,
It's a classic.
It didn't strike very strong.
Of course, it's a classic.
course.
Yeah, for you, not for me.
Not for the world, dude.
Well, for me, I didn't want to talk about.
Let's not get sexist again, huh?
But if I could say one thing with you, Philip. See, a lot of things you're saying, I go against you, because the old comedies, what happens? The reason new comedies now they have more tension because they have to be politically correct. In the older comedians, they could say about gays, they could talk about lesbians, they could talk about the blacks and this, and the door is open for everything. Now, what happens? The new comedians, they have to be very politically correct and to be very careful to choose the words wisely. So it's difficult. Then Ronnie Dangerfield. You have two big stand-up comedians have one-liners. One like he passed away, which was Mitch Hedberg, and then the other one you were right, Jimmy Carr. They're white liners. These are the ones I know very fast. So the white one-liners, they do exist. And then to me, David Chappelle, I don't like him. I don't know what it is. It's because the way he talks very mellow, blah, blah, blah. I don't find C.K. Lewis. Not crazy.
Louis C.K.?
Whatever. See, I'm not crazy about him. See, I like more like John Pinette, even though he passed away. Carlos Mencia. I like the Sugar Sam. I like Joey Coy, Tom Pupa. See, I like these comedians. When they go in there, they have ambiance. They have energy. They want to talk. They move around. They get into the show. So it's like I just said, to each their own. You know?
Well, and yeah, it's obviously subjective. I mean,
exactly. So like when you're saying about all the comedians you're saying and you're stretching about how great they are and everything, for me, I want to put my finger in my mouth because I find the opposite. To my opinion, towards you, it's the opposite. Doesn't mean you're wrong, but for me, it's the opposite. Like I like Howie Mandel. See, like Joan River, I love her too. You know, like what's it called, Bobby Slayton. There's Mike Walball. There's a lot of great comedians, you know. But the thing is that the olden days, comedians they could have done what they were limited to saying marijuana jokes, because now they can talk about drugs, they can bash more to politics without getting arrested than the olden days. But the olden days, they can bash about racism and all this kind of thing, and nothing would happen to them. So it's kind of it's a different world now. It's more politically correct. And that's why, like, now, and there is different kind of comedians, like, now, just for laughs. If you want to hear dirty, grungy words, you go to the Nasty Show. Some comedians are great. Some comedians, they just use bad words, and they think that's what it's called being nasty, but to me, it doesn't make it funny.
Actually,
so, like, or the good days, or the new days, there's good and bad. There's good comedians in each era, and there's bad ones at the same time.
And it's one of the reasons why I stopped going to see the Nasty Show. Because like I went one of the first years that it started, and it was great, right? It didn't mean that the dirtier was better. It was just dirty comedy, but it was comedy. The last few times I went, it was just like making it the nastiest joke ever.
Cursing.
Which, okay, but it doesn't mean it's funny.
No.
Well,
yeah, what happens?
Go ahead.
Okay, that's what happened. I went to the Nasty Show. The last one I went was 2-3 years ago. I was so turned off that guys were just going there cursing and saying the body parts out loud and everything, and they think just saying that was making it funny. I go, no, you're not, because I don't mind being Nasty Show, but make it funny. Don't start saying like if you're singing the man's organs and the female's organ, you're gonna see me laughing. I'm like, oh wow, he's saying that. Okay, now make it funny out of it. And I'll agree with you. Like 2-3 years ago, the Nasty Show, I went there. I didn't laugh as much as I did the first Nasty Show completely. That's it. Yeah, I agree with you. nasty. Just because you say nasty word doesn't mean it's gonna be funny.
That also, to me, what qualifies for well, obviously it's subjective, but to me, a good comedian is one that I can go see his specials and still laugh to this day. So I can go see a George Carlin special from 1984. It's still to this day the best the best opening line, in my opinion, of any stand up of all time was I think it was George, the one in the beginning of the 90s. George Carlin came out with Coming in New York or something like that, something along those lines. And he opens up the monologue with, "Don't you find it a little bit strange that Ronald Reagan got an operation on his index finger and George Bush got an operation on his asshole? What are these men trying to tell us?" And I always found that hilarious as an opening line for a stand-up. And I do agree that back in the day, what it was, yes, you couldn't, a lot of topics were taboo and you couldn't say that, but that's where the Richard Pryors of this world, the Lenny Bruce, the George Carlins came out of that group and wanted to do something different. On TV, they felt that they were being limited in what they can do, and that's where it kind of opened up a bit. And now, yes, it's true. There's more censorship, I guess, in terms of how stand-up can be. However, stand-up should still be the type of comedy that stretches the limits. Safe comedy doesn't doesn't usually work. If somebody does safer comedy in terms of it, they usually don't last very long. But then again, very vulgar either doesn't work very well as well. Look at Andrew Dice Clay. He's trying to do a comeback.
He's still around.
Yeah, he's still around. He still tours.
Around.
Yeah, he still tours.
But it's not as big as it used to be.
But his stand-up hasn't aged very well. I mean, if you look at a stand-up from, for me personally, like it's dirty jokes, and yeah, he plays around with the crowd a little bit, which is fine, and you have to have talent to do that. But it's kind of, you listen to him and it sounds outdated. It sounds like something that, I don't know, it just falls short a lot of times.
Like an old rock song from the 50s. You cannot put on Trome and sing, it's outdated, no? The material.
Well, yeah, but that's a little different. Like the material itself is relevant in the sense that it's modern. Like he'll talk about like more recent stuff, but the type of stand up, it's just, it doesn't age very well. It's as if like his stand up hasn't evolved. He had one type of style. He didn't evolve from that. He didn't evolve his craft. He just did it. And then at one point, people were just like, "Yeah, it's okay," and then just stopped watching him. Although he still sells out in Las Vegas. I think at one point he had a contract in Las Vegas, and I think now he does tours.
He had a sitcom at some point.
When he tried to clean his image, he tried to go under Andrew Clay. He tried to go into movies as doing a clean personality. And that didn't work. And as soon as that didn't work, he went back to his stand-up raunchy comedian. He went with the Dice character.
Well, I just have one thing to add.
Yep.
Because I agree with what you guys are saying. This is a great conversation. The difference between the old and the new, I think, back in the day when someone became popular, their acts became polished. And they did their dues in the comedy clubs and all that. Whereas today, there's a lot more avenues like YouTube or even Netflix that there's mediocre comedians on there with their own specials, where you would never see these mediocre comedians have specials 30 years ago. For you to be on HBO, you have to be a big deal. Back then, and I think that's why I don't find the newer generation as funny as the older generation. They're funny in their own way, but they're not hilarious like a George Carlin or a Robin Williams. It's not even in the same category, in my opinion. And that's basically it. That's what I think the difference between both.
But can it be sometimes it's like when you watch something when you're younger, and I used to example the Three Stooges. When I was young, I used to love the Three Stooges. I used to cry laughing. Then like a couple years ago, I watched it again. I didn't laugh at all. I just chuckled because after watching so many comedy shows, so many comedy movies and comedy shows or TV or on stage, you end up hearing so many jokes that it comes to a certain point. Some comedians that used to laugh a lot at the beginning, you do not laugh anymore because you kind of out laughed it. You could say.
It's not your humor anymore.
Yeah, or an example,
Well,
funnies used to be like you kind of like you heard better jokes than that. Then when you do go back at it, it's like it's not as funny as I remember.
I
That could
th-
be
I think I think you feel like that if the comedian hasn't evolved through time and they're just saying the same material over and over again. Seinfeld is like that. Seinfeld, you go and look at his stand-up routine. It's exactly the same. Yeah, the material is a little different because he talks about the current times, but it's the same thing as he did 20-25 years ago. And
Isn't
when I went to see him, I didn't find him that funny. I mean, yeah, it was
because you outgrew it.
entertaining.
You outgrew it.
Pardon me?
You out you, you outgrew his comedy. Like you find
Yeah,
other it's funnier than he does. That's what it is. Like it's like you. It's like I'll be a metaphor. Okay, it's like you drive a car. It was the best car ever. But then after, as years you went from the Mustang to a Corvette to a Ferrari. When you go back to your first car that you freaked out, you're like, hey, you're not as amazing as I thought it was be. Same thing with Seinfeld. Because after him, probably you opened your eyes to other comedians. And then you find other comedian venues that were more to your style, more to your taste, that when you hear Seinfeld again, you're like, okay, now that's, or your materials are not as funny, or you were never as funny as I thought you were. And like I just found comedians more to my taste. So it's like comedians are musical groups. Who loves Led Zeppelin? Who doesn't? And who loves Pink Floyd? Who doesn't? Same thing with comedians. What's good for one person, another person will not be crazy about it. And that's why I felt like I used to love watching just for laughs, comedy shows and everything. I used to love just to laugh. But slowly but surely, I started knowing which comedians was more my style, and which other comedians I didn't laugh as much the second time I see them or the third or whatever. So you kind of get accustomed to your flavor, you could say, of what kind of comedians attracts you.
But in general, though, similar to a movie, I would compare it more to a movie than music. Where why are there some movies where I can watch forget the comedic aspect of it, but movies in general? Why are there movies that I can watch 6,000 times, and then there's other movies where I watch it once and I'm like I never want to watch this again? Not because it's bad, just because I'll never want to watch it again. Like for me, a movie that's like that is Gladiator. I can watch that every time it's on TV. Every time it's passing somewhere or it's in the middle, I'll watch it till the end because it's one of those movies I just love to watch. It's a good movie. I don't think it's better than any other movie, but it's for me it stands out and it's always enjoyable to watch it. Stand up is similar, where to me the cream of the crop. If you ask anybody, um, you know, I think there was a top 100 comedians of all time. I think a few years ago, and Richard Pryor and George Carlin were one and two. And I'm looking at it. Even Robin Williams, I can look at it. If you look at their old stuff, and I do that very often. Like Robin Williams, I have his CDs or his records from the mid '80s, or even when he used to do comedy relief. They're still funny. Richard Pryor on the Sunset Strip, his comeback. That was his comeback comedy tour after he was burned at his house after I think he was smoking crack and he passed out and the house went in flames. That was his next stand up, and that's one of the funniest stand ups of all time. George Carlin, as he got his last few years, I have to admit he was kind of dark in his stand up, and maybe it wasn't as funny. But I can go back to his stand up from the hippy dippy weatherman to in the '60s to his '90s when he was like again more of a political stand up more than anything else, I still watch it and I still laugh to this day. Obviously, it's subjective because that may not be what you find, but that's what And I guess because they're in 1 and 2, a lot of people think of this the same way. But that's to me a good stand-up, one that could stand the test of time, that I can go back and watch it or listen to it over and over and over again and still laugh to this day. There's some comedians that I don't like. Dane Cook, he has funny stuff, but he's not. I mean, to say that maybe in 20 years that I'll remember what he said, probably not. I don't think he's anywhere close to being the top stand-up. He has funny bits, but he's not, a gold standard. Whereas these older guys, I still say Robin Williams is one of the best ones. I think it was either Dino or somebody posted. He did for the 4th of July one year in the 70s. He had done a whole stand-up as him being a flag, the American flag, and he does like a 20-minute bit about that.
It was all improv too.
And, yeah, it was amazing. It was. It's really.
And it was still funny today. Yeah.
You watch it.
He's talented, that guy, Robin Williams.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the type of comedian. Like even a Richard Pryor or a Billy Crystal. A lot of people don't think of Billy Crystal. They think of him as the movie guy, but he started off as doing stand-up. He was a stand-up guy, and then he went to do. He did SNL for a year. Then he continued doing.
He did Broadway a lot.
He did Broadway.
So
go ahead.
Yeah,
Soap. He did Soap.
Yeah, it's true. He
did Soap.
Yeah,
that's true.
So, I mean, you could name any one of these, and the guys that I named, or even the ones I didn't, and say, oh, these are my favorites or not. I just, from the old generation of stand-ups, the ones that, the really old ones, to me, what always stood up to me is Jonathan Winters, because he's like a Robin Williams, just a precursor to Robin Williams. Robin Williams just continued that, and that was his influence as well. Robin Williams actually did mention that it was his mentor as well. So you see where that came from, and you see where his influence came from. But the one that I always watch over and over again is Rodney Dangerfield. I can watch him for hours on end, either on a guest spot on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or Jay Leno, or when he used to do the intros on his Dangerfield's stand-up improv comedy club in New York. You can watch those clips on YouTube. He's one of those guys I just laugh. It's like one-liners that you'll never hear again today, and they're always similar. That he has no respect, or there's always that around that theme.
Well,
but he was always able to come up with something new and refreshing every time, and that he did that for, I don't know, 60 years, easy. Yeah. So you have to get it. No, same thing with Bob Hope. The guy performed till he was in his 90s. So you have to have talent to do it that long and keep people laughing along the lines. And a lot of these guys, when you look at it, there's two ways you can do it. You can be a stand-up first and then try and go into movies, and you can be in movies and then try to go to stand-up. One way is there's a lot more comedians that go to acting than the other way around. I think so anyways. And a lot of these guys, if they had a decent acting career. I mean, Richard Pryor had a pretty good movie career along with his stand-up, although in my mind he's a stand-up comedian first and then a movie guy. George Carlin had his fun in movies. He even did TV. He was the conductor on Thomas the Tank Engine for kids as well.
Yeah.
Billy Crystal has had an amazing movie career. Robin Williams, just pick a movie out of a hat and TV shows, and he's there. Dave Chappelle, he had the Dave Chappelle Show, which was a skit show, which was amazing. It was kind of the precursor to Key and Peele. Louis C.K. starting to go into movies now. So it's a lot easier for these guys to go into movies and act in movies. It doesn't always work. I mean, there's some comedians that go into movies and you're like, ugh. shaking your head. But in this case, these guys are very, very talented to a level that's insane, and their body of work surpasses the test of time. It just passes that. You can name me a stand-up comedian that you love. I guarantee you'll probably like him in 10 years, even though he doesn't do anything for the next 10 years, because his stand-up is still relevant, and it still makes you laugh to a point. So, Steve, you've been pretty quiet.
I'm not sure if I love comedy, but I'm not sure if I know as much as you guys. So I just let you guys run with it, and you did an amazing job. For me, I prefer the old school comedians. I think they had a lot more to say. As funny as they were, you had guys like Richard Pryor who would sometimes, wear his heart on his sleeve and make it funny. I remember seeing a stand-up where he talked about, a woman breaking your heart, and he went on for like a 20-minute rant, but it was funny, but it was still poignant in a sense, because everybody had their heart broken at one time or another. He was basically, I guess, the heart and the guts of comedy. You had George Carlin, who was the brain and maybe perhaps the conscience of comedy, if you want to call him that. Mm-hmm. Those were my go-to guys. Robin Williams, because he was a comedian and an impressionist all in one. He was like a firecracker. I like Dave Chappelle. I like Louis C.K. I thought I seen a couple of Chris Rock ones. I thought he was pretty good too. Don Rickles is a go-to for me.
Oh yeah.
I think out of the new comedians, I think they either you like their brand of comedy or they don't. Like usually a lot of them I saw on Netflix, they were talking about their life in the hood.
Yeah.
And I'm a white boy from the East End, so I have no understanding of that whatsoever. But I think the closest I'm going to get to, like, let's say an Eddie Murphy, maybe not up to his caliber in his peak, but I think Kevin Hart is maybe the one guy that I think I get into more than anybody else. I think he talks about family life and stuff that I can relate to, and like fatherhood and marriage and tales of his family. I thought he's the closest guy I can get to. But again, like I said, I prefer the old school comedians like you guys. I think you mentioned more like Richard Pryor, George Carlin. Those are more my guys. I can go back to them. Rodney Dangerfield, I can watch either their movies or their stand-up. I mean, Back to School is still a comedy classic in my opinion, and I can watch it 100 times a day. I'll still laugh. There's so many one-liners in there. For me, it's old school was better because I think they had a lot more. At one point, they can be funny, but they can be touching, and they can have something of. They show a sense, I guess, vulnerability. Maybe I'm missing out on that one. I'm not sure, but they show a different aspect. They really, for me, they kind of touch things. And I think today's comedians miss that boat. They just, it's trying to make a laugh quickly, fast. And then there's no vulnerability or weight or heartfelt confession to it. It's just, how do I make a fast joke, make them laugh and move on? And it's not going to resennate, like in 10 years, you won't watch it again, like you said.
Well, it's actually pretty funny because back, if you listen to all these guys, the George Carlins, the Billy Crystals, the Eddie Murphys, back at that time, obviously you didn't have the internet, you didn't have YouTube, so one of the big benchmarks you had the Merv Griffin show and you had a bunch of other shows in similar caliber. However, the ones that made it to superstardom, they always went on the Tonight Show, and they got the blessing from Johnny Carson. A lot of these comedians, when you listen to them, they're like, yeah, I was waiting, either you made it or you didn't with Johnny Carson. If he liked you, superstardom right away. If he didn't, your career is dead in the pits. So you had like kind of a unofficial triage, I guess, of, who would be successful and who wouldn't. But now with all the media available to you, either through podcasting, through internet, through you name it, obviously you're going to have a lot of different types of comedians doing things. And some of them, so basically you have a bigger pot of comedians, but they may not be.
Filler.
Sorry?
A a lot more filler, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay.
you're not gonna have, because even if you think about it, Dave Chappelle started stand up in the late '80s. Chris Rock, same thing. He started in the '80s. Louis C.K. started in the '80s. Um, so the newer stand-ups, you can maybe the
That's
ones.
in the 80s, that's when comedy got strong. That's when comedy was that you can actually make a lot of money out of comedy.
Yeah,
That's when everybody jumped in the bandwagon. Is like be a comedian, you can actually make a living and surplus with that.
like now, a lot of people love Amy Schumer, as she's kind of the new version of Joan Rivers, I guess. And I loved her first few stand-ups, and I actually liked Trainwreck too as a movie. But her last stand-up on Netflix was like something with leather. I forget what it's called. I watched it, and I was just like, I don't know if the novelty is wearing off,
It wasn't that funny. Yeah.
or it was just not a strong showing, which is very possible. I mean, not every stand-up uh, show will be bang on amazing. And maybe it was just a blip on her radar. I just didn't find her as funny. And the last movie she did was apparently not very well received. The one with Goldie Hawn. They're like,
Oh, yeah, mother and daughter.
yeah. So apparently it was very. The acting was awkward in there. I didn't see it personally, so maybe the novelty is wearing off. Um, but there's a few from the new ones that came out. Um, I would strongly suggest Hassan Minaj. He's like the daily correspondent on the Daily Show. He's like the the ethnic correspondent or something like that. His stand up was actually really really funny. I laughed from beginning to end. It was recommended by my buddy John, and I came home and I watched it, and it was the first comedy in a long stand up comedy in a long time that I laughed from beginning to end. I also love Fluffy, Global Gabriel Iglesias. He's like this bigger guy, Mexican.
Yeah, it
Um,
was last comic standing.
yeah, he did that as well. I think so. Yeah, he's really really good. And there's one that nobody talks about, but he does the rounds and he goes on TV and he actually won Last Comic Standing one year. Was Alonzo Bowden.
Yeah,
He won one year, but he's on everything. He's on the he's on the internet, like doing guest hosts. He goes on TV, but he's not like in your face. Like he doesn't have like a steady job on TV. He just appears here and there, and he's always at Just for Laughs. And I went to see him twice, and he's hilarious. He does more of the more recent what's in the news type of stuff, which is really good. But other than that, I mean, you can name me any name. It's to me, it sounds the same. It's not. There's nothing that differentiates one or the other. A lot of times when when Stephen was saying, the go tos that he was going, Rodney Dangerfield, George Carlin, they have their own style and they have their own personality, and you know what you're getting with them. Um, if you get, the newer one, let's say I tell you Hassan Minaj, it means nothing to most people, probably to you guys too, because he's just started. He can be a comedian out of a hat. He didn't distinguish himself yet from the group that was there. Um, um, so yeah, I do find that it's weaker just because the it's diluted. The comedy pool is diluted. So you're gonna have less funny jokes, not as funny people, and the ones that are gonna, I think personally, the ones that are gonna last the longest are probably gonna survive. The ones that are really take their craft to heart, they're gonna survive and they're gonna come out. Just that it's gonna take longer for them because they have, unlike before where you had kind of uh, a standard with with Johnny Carson and Tonight Show where he would tell you yes or no. Um, Now you don't have that. The late night shows don't have as much clout. I mean, I love Conan, I love Kimmel and all those other ones, but they're instead of having one late night show, you have five now. So even that's diluted. So yeah, I think that's it for my end. You guys have anything else to add?
no,
I'm good.
Good.
Yeah,
You nailed
it. Not really. You nailed it in your point of view. My point of view is different, but you nailed it anyways.
Well, yeah. Well, that's the whole point. It's subjective, right? So it's my.
Exactly.
So I mean,
Yes.
exactly.
you know, some people, to be quite honest, I could have added easily, you know, Jim Carrey in here, because his stand up too was, when he used to do stand up, was hilarious, but it was more slapstick, for a lot of things. So some people like slapstick a lot more. You know, some people might put Carrot Top.
Yeah.
I don't personally think he's amazing, but some people would, because they like that type of comedy.
Like Andy Kaufman.
Or yes, Andy Kaufman, which apparently he's a genius.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I understand his point. He was like, he made comedy for himself instead of doing it for the audience. So if you look at it if you look at it from that perspective, he made himself laugh at the expense of the audience. So sometimes the audience didn't laugh. There's a lot of times where he went on stage and he bombed like really, really bad. But in his eyes, it was a great performance.
Yeah.
You know? So, all right. So I guess we'll wrap this up. This was old stand-up versus new stand-up. I think we're more in the old stand-up type of crowd, also due to our age. And there's the new generation coming up. I think they're going to have a lot of work to do to keep our attention in the years to come. So that was the show this week. Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week.
Take care, Phil. Take care, D.
Arrivederci.
All right. Ciao.
Live
Live the dream.
Best medicine.
le rêve.
Stand up. Stand up.